Think your dating life is a nightmare? Swipe left, swipe right, get ghosted. Suffer through another awkward coffee date where the most exciting thing you discuss is your favorite Netflix series. Feels tough, right? Now, I want you to imagine a world where swiping right could lead to your entire family's social and financial ruin. A world where being ghosted meant you were quite literally dead to society. A social pariah no respectable person would ever speak to again. Imagine a first date that's a 12-course dinner where using the wrong fork could shatter your future, all while being watched by a jury of your peers, your parents, and every gossip monger in the city. Welcome to the Victorian era. Between 1837 and 1901, millions of young people navigated this high-stakes, full-contact sport called courtship. It was a minefield of unspoken rules, secret languages, and suffocating corsets. The pressure was immense, the stakes were impossibly high, but somehow, against all odds, people still managed to flirt, fall deeply in love, and build lives together. So, get comfortable. I mean it. Pull up that blanket, adjust your pillows, and silence your phone, because we're about to leave the 21st century behind. We're going back to London, 1862, and you're not just going to watch the story, you're going to live it. Chapter 1. The Dawn of the Marriage Market ***. The 6:15 in the morning. Forget the gentle chime of your smartphone alarm. Your awakening is a brutal, creeping chill that seeps from the very air and into your bones. You are 19-year-old Elellanena Hartwell, and your eyes flutter open to a world of oppressive gray. The dim London light, thick with coal smoke and fog, struggles to penetrate the heavy, wine-colored damask curtains that guard your window. This isn't the soft, inviting light of a modern morning. It's a grim, reluctant dawn that promises another day of damp and cold. The first sensation, before thought even forms, is the profound cold. You've burrowed deep beneath a mountain of woolen blankets and a heavy quilt, your own little nest of warmth. But the moment you dare to extend an arm out from under this sanctuary, the air attacks it. It feels like plunging your hand into a bucket of ice water. The shock is so immediate, so visceral, that you quickly retract it. You pull the blankets up to your chin and breathe out, watching in morbid fascination as your breath forms a perfect, ghostly cloud in the frigid air. "Miss Elellanena? Are you awake, miss?" The voice is soft but persistent, and it's followed by the gentle creak of your bedroom door. It's Martha, your lady's maid. She's a stout, sensible woman in her late 20s with kind eyes and hands roughened by endless work. She has already been awake for hours, her day beginning long before dawn in the cold, dark servants' quarters in the attic. She enters carrying a heavy ceramic pitcher, steam faintly rising from its spout. A precious cargo of lukewarm water, she has hauled up 3 long flights of stairs from the kitchens below. "Your mother says today's the day, miss," Martha says, her voice a mixture of encouragement and sympathy. She pours the water into the wash basin on your vanity, the splash echoing in the quiet room. "The Chamberlain's dinner party is tonight." And just like that, the cold in the room is nothing compared to the icy dread that plummets through your stomach. Today, the day your life pivots. It's your official, formal introduction to London society. It's the first major dinner party of your very first season. That frantic, 6-month period where the daughters of the upper class are paraded like prized livestock before eligible bachelors. It is, in no uncertain terms, the terrifying beginning of your career on the Victorian marriage market. "Martha," you whisper, your voice hoarse with sleep and fear. "I think I'm going to be sick." Martha offers a small, knowing smile as she lays out your undergarments. Now, miss, every young lady feels that way on her first outing. It's only natural. But your mama says you're ready, and ready you'll be. You're not sure if you want to cry, scream, or simply burrow back under the blankets and pretend this day isn't happening. Your modern mind, the one that's used to swiping right on an app or casually meeting someone at school or a bar, rebels against this entire concept. This isn't dating. This is a strategic military campaign where your reputation is the front line, and a single misstep can lead to catastrophic defeat. "Can you imagine?" Martha continues, her tone conspiratorial as she helps you sit up. "Mr. Thornfield might be there tonight. The one your mama says has 2,000 a year. She gives you a pointed, meaningful look. And there it is, the naked, unvarnished truth of Victorian courtship. It is never, ever just about finding someone you connect with, someone who makes you laugh, someone you might actually like. It is a complex, brutal calculus of income, family lineage, social standing, and political connections. It's about securing your future. And tonight, every single person in that crowded, glittering drawing room, the ambitious mothers, the critical dowagers, the calculating bachelors, will be watching you, judging your posture, your conversation, your dress, your smile. Your every move will be cataloged, analyzed, and gossiped about before you've even finished the fish course. Your mother has spent the last 3 years of your life in a relentless, focused effort to prepare you for this very moment. It has been a finishing school of excruciating detail. You have endured endless lessons in the art of proper conversation. How to be engaging but not too witty, knowledgeable but not a blue stocking, an intellectual woman, considered highly undesirable, and demure but not dull. You have been taught how to sit without slouching, stand without fidgeting, and walk with a graceful glide that suggests you float rather than stride. You can navigate the treacherous minefield of a 12-course meal, using the correct piece of cutlery from the vast arsenal laid out before you without a moment's hesitation. You know how to dance the quadrille and the waltz with elegant restraint, never looking like you're enjoying the physical contact too much. You have mastered the art of lifting your skirt to ascend stairs, showing just enough of a well-turned ankle to be considered intriguing, but not a fraction of an inch more, lest you be branded as fast. The stakes are not just about embarrassment. They are existential. One misplaced word, one improper glance at an unmarried gentleman, one joke that falls flat, and your entire future could crumble into dust. Your family's reputation, so painstakingly built over generations, would be tarnished along with your own. Social ruin was a very real, very terrifying prospect. "Come now, miss. Let's get you washed," Martha says, her practical tone cutting through your spiral of panic. She helps you out of the warm bed, and the full, crushing weight of the Victorian morning ritual begins. First, the wash. There is no hot, steaming shower to wake you up. You stand shivering in your thin cotton chemise, splashing your face and hands with the barely warm water from the basin. A full body bath was a weekly, or sometimes even monthly, affair. This quick, targeted wash was considered perfectly sufficient for daily hygiene. You know your modern sensibilities are recoiling at the thought, but in 1862, this was the height of cleanliness. "Your mother wants you in the blue silk tonight," Martha says as she begins laying out the architecture of your daily attire. Says it brings out the color of your eyes. In your head, you are screaming. Not the blue one, the one with the whalebone-reinforced bodice so brutally tight it makes breathing a conscious, difficult effort. The one that feels like being trapped in an elegant, silk-lined vice. But outwardly, you simply nod. Survival as a Victorian woman means accepting a baseline of physical discomfort as your constant, uncomplaining companion. Breakfast is a tense, quiet affair in the chilly dining room. Your father, a man more comfortable with ledgers than with emotions, is completely hidden behind the vast pages of the Times. Your mother, a woman whose entire life's work has culminated in this moment, uses the time to conduct a final, grueling examination. She quizzes you on the names, incomes, and family histories of every eligible bachelor likely to be in attendance at the Chamberlain's dinner. "Now remember, Elellanena," she says, her voice sharp and focused. "The Chamberlain's second son, Thomas, is in trade. He imports tea. Be polite, of course, but do not encourage him. Their eldest, Arthur, however, has prospects in the law. He is worth a smile. And the Darlington boy, Brady, might be there. Dreadfully poor conversation, I hear, but his family connections are among the best in London. He is worth 2 dances, should he ask." She pauses, her eyes locking with yours. "Oh, and if Mr. Thornfield attends, and I have it on good authority that he will, you must be mindful not to appear too eager. Men of his standing enjoy the thrill of the chase." You take a small, mechanical bite of dry toast, the food tasteless in your mouth. Your stomach is a tight, churning knot of anxiety. Unlike your modern dating life, where a simple, direct text, "Hey, wanna grab coffee sometime?" can initiate everything, Victorian courtship is an impossibly elaborate game of chess. But it's a game where you are both a player and a pawn, and you're not allowed to touch the pieces directly. Every move must be made through proper channels, at the precisely correct time, and always with the right witnesses present. And Elellanena, your mother adds, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, remember the cardinal rules. A lady never initiates conversation with a gentleman unless they have been properly introduced by a mutual acquaintance. And you must never, ever find yourself alone with a gentleman, even for a single, fleeting moment. Is that understood? Yes, mother. You say automatically, the words a catechism you've repeated 1,000 times. So how did people ever get to know each other? You're probably wondering that, lying in your comfortable bed, phone in hand. The simple, shocking answer is, they didn't. Not in the way we understand it. The entire system of Victorian courtship was meticulously designed to prevent exactly what modern dating is all about, getting to know someone intimately one-on-one. Instead, you would meet potential partners in strictly controlled, brightly lit environments, with dozens of family members and chaperones hovering like a flock of well-dressed, hyper-vigilant vultures, ready to swoop down at the first sign of impropriety. The morning drags on, an eternity of needlepoint and nervous anticipation, until finally, the afternoon arrives. It's time to prepare for the dinner party. And this isn't a quick shower and a hunt through your closet. Oh no, this is a grueling 4-hour production. The transformation begins. Martha draws you a bath, a rare and luxurious treat. The water, heated in the kitchen and carried up flight after flight of stairs, is lukewarm by the time it fills the portable tin tub placed before your fireplace. It's scented with rosewater, a small extravagance to mask the ever-present scent of coal smoke that hangs over London. You soak for just long enough to take the deep, persistent chill from your bones. The brief respite, a precious moment of peace before the ordeal of dressing commences. Once you are dried and powdered, the elaborate process of constructing your identity as a proper Victorian lady begins. It is a process of layering, of building a fortress of fabric and bone around your body. First comes the chemise, a simple, long cotton shift. This is the only soft, breathable barrier that will exist between your skin and the complex, restrictive machinery of your attire. Over this go the cotton drawers, which, to your modern mind, are a bizarre creation. They are essentially two separate leggings joined only at the waistband, with a completely open seam from front to back. Yes, Victorian underwear had an open crotch. It was a matter of grim practicality, making it easier to use the chamber pot when you are encased in 17 layers of clothing and a steel cage. Next, the centerpiece of the entire ensemble, the instrument of both fashion and torture, the corset. Hold on, let me paint you a proper picture of this device. A true Victorian corset is not the flimsy, decorative lace-up bustier you might see in a modern lingerie store. This is a heavy-duty piece of social engineering, a contraption of thick, stiff coutil fabric, reinforced with dozens of whalebone or steel strips, known as bones. Its sole purpose is to violently reshape your body into the fashionable silhouette of the era. A tiny, cinched waist, a high, pushed-up bosom, and a ramrod-straight posture. It is, in essence, a wearable cage for your torso. Deep breath in, miss. Martha warns, her voice taking on the tone of a seasoned field surgeon about to perform a difficult procedure. You obey, filling your lungs with as much air as you can, your hands gripping the sturdy mahogany bedpost for support. You know what's coming. Martha stands behind you, takes the long, thick laces in her hands, plants her foot firmly on your lower back for leverage, and pulls. The sensation is immediate and brutal. The corset tightens like a boa constrictor, squeezing the air from your lungs with an audible whoosh. Your ribs feel as though they are being ground together, pushed inward until they might touch your spine. Your internal organs are compressed, displaced upwards and downwards. You can no longer take a deep breath. Breathing is now restricted to shallow, rapid gasps from the very top of your chest. This is the beginning of corset training, a process that, over years, can permanently deform a woman's rib cage. Again, Miss Martha grunts, already working up a sweat. We need to get you down another inch for the blue dress to fit properly. You gasp for air, your vision swimming for a moment. Another vicious pull. The laces groan in protest. The steel bones dig into your flesh. You can feel the familiar ache in your lower ribs, a sign that they will likely be bruised by the end of the night. By the time Martha is finally satisfied and ties off the laces in a secure knot, your waist is now an unnaturally tiny 16 inches in circumference. Your posture is forcibly, painfully erect. Slouching is a physical impossibility. This is the state in which you will spend the next 8 hours, eating, conversing, and attempting to appear effortlessly graceful. Suddenly, swiping on dating apps while lying on your couch in sweatpants seems like the pinnacle of human freedom, doesn't it? But we are nowhere near finished. Over the corseted torso goes the crinoline, another marvel of Victorian engineering. It is a vast, bell-shaped cage made of concentric hoops of flexible steel, all held together with fabric tape. This is what will give your skirt its iconic, voluminous silhouette. The surprisingly lightweight but incredibly cumbersome. It bounces and sways as you walk, knocking against furniture, threatening to upend small tables, and making it utterly impossible to pass through a normal doorway without turning sideways and carefully maneuvering your steel cage through the opening. Hold still, Miss Martha mutters, her mouth full of pins as she begins to slide petticoat after petticoat over the crinoline. There's a muslin petticoat for shape, a flannel one for warmth, and finally, a starched cotton one for structure and sound. The fashionable rustle that announced a lady's presence. Each layer adds weight, a palpable burden on your hips and back. By the time she fastens the actual dress, the dreaded blue silk with its impossibly tight bodice and a skirt so voluminous it seems to have its own weather system, you are carrying an extra 15 to 20 pounds of fabric and steel. And now for your hair. Martha sits you down at the vanity and begins the painstaking, hour-long process of arranging your long locks. Forget a quick ponytail or a messy bun. Your hair is brushed until it shines, then sectioned, then curled with hot tongs heated in the fire. A process that requires immense skill to avoid scorching your hair or burning your scalp. Each curl is then pinned, twisted, and woven into an elaborate, structured coiffure that is designed to look both sophisticated and demurely modest. It is a work of art, a sculpture of hair that must not have a single strand out of place. Finally, the finishing touches. Your face is lightly dusted with rice powder to achieve the fashionable pale, almost translucent complexion. Your lips are given a hint of color with a light rouge, but not too much, or you'd be considered painted and therefore fast. Your white kitskin gloves are carefully buttoned up to your elbows. Your small, decorative handbag, the reticule, is prepared with a lace handkerchief and a vial of smelling salts, a necessary accessory for any woman whose breathing is severely restricted by her corset. By the time you are deemed presentable, you are utterly exhausted, and the evening has not even begun. You look beautiful, Elellanena, your mother says when you finally descend the grand staircase. There's a genuine, swelling pride in her voice, and for a fleeting moment, you feel a flash of warmth. This is her masterpiece. She has molded you, trained you, and prepared you for this your entire life. This is her victory. Your father looks up from his pocket watch, his usual gruff expression softening for a moment. My girl's all grown up, he says, and in his voice, you detect a surprising hint of melancholy. He understands the transactional nature of this evening. Once you enter society, once you find a suitable match, you will leave his legal and financial protection for your husbands. That is the way of the Victorian world. A daughter is a temporary asset to be transferred. The carriage ride to the Chamberlain's home in Belgravia is silent, a bubble of nervous anticipation rolling through the gaslit streets of London. You stare out the window at the blurred figures of people on the sidewalks, at the shadowy outlines of the grand townhouses, and wonder, which of the men you will meet tonight might eventually become your husband? Because that is the only end goal here. There is no dating for fun, no casual relationships, no seeing where things go. There is only one destination, marriage, and preferably a successful proposal by the end of the season. The Chamberlain's townhouse is a blaze of light and activity. Footmen in immaculate livery stand at attention as a parade of carriages deposits a river of finely dressed guests at the grand entrance. Your father helps you down from the carriage, his hands carefully placed to avoid wrinkling the voluminous silk of your dress. Remember, chin up. Your mother whispers urgently as you approach the door. And for heaven's sake, don't talk about those books you're always reading. Men don't want a blue stocking. They want a charming companion. You take a deep breath, or rather, the shallow, inadequate gasp your corset. The moment you step through the grand double doors of the Chamberlain's townhouse, you are hit by a wall of sensory information. The air inside is thick, almost syrupy, a potent combination of expensive floral perfumes, men's bay rum cologne, beeswax from the polished floors, and the subtle, unmistakable scent of old money. The light is dazzling. Massive crystal chandeliers, their candles blazing, hang from the high, ornate ceilings, throwing 1,000 dancing, fractured points of light across the room, catching the glint of silk gowns, the sparkle of diamond tiaras, and the polished shine of gentlemen's shoes. The sound is a constant, low murmur, a beehive of polite, controlled conversation. It's punctuated by the occasional tinkle of carefully modulated laughter and the rustle of silk skirts. But beneath this civilized veneer, the atmosphere is electric with tension. Because everyone, absolutely everyone, is watching everyone else. It is a room filled with predators and prey, all disguised in evening wear. Mothers are scanning the room for wealthy sons-in-law. Fathers are assessing the competition. And the young women, like you, are trying to look beautiful, serene, and utterly unaware that their entire futures are being decided in this overheated, overcrowded room. Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, Mrs. Chamberlain, a formidable woman bedecked in emeralds, greets you at the door. Her smile is wide, but her eyes are sharp, analytical. They sweep over you from head to toe in a single practiced glance, assessing your dress, your hair, your posture. How utterly delightful you could come. The intricate, unspoken dance begins immediately. Your mother, a seasoned general on this social battlefield, expertly maneuvers you through the dense crowd, making strategic introductions. You are a ship, and she is your pilot, navigating you towards safe harbors, eligible bachelors with good prospects, and away from dangerous shoals, charming but penniless second sons or men with questionable reputations. For each introduction, you perform the same ritual. You curtsy, a graceful dip that is surprisingly difficult in a crinoline. You smile, a gentle, modest expression that doesn't show too much teeth. You speak only when spoken to, answering questions with polite, pre-rehearsed phrases. All the while, you are scanning the room for potential suitors, but you must do so through lowered lashes. Making direct, sustained eye contact with a gentleman would be considered shockingly forward, an unladylike sign of aggression. Miss Hartwell, may I present Mr. James Thornfield? Your host, Mr. Chamberlain, a portly man with an impressive mustache, materializes at your side. He gestures to a tall, dark-haired gentleman who looks to be in his late 20s. His evening clothes are impeccably tailored, and he carries himself with an air of quiet confidence that sets him apart from the younger, more nervous bachelors in the room. This is him, the man your mother mentioned. £2,000 a year, a fortune in 1862, excellent family connections. The prime catch of the evening. You curtsy. He bows a formal, elegant inclination of his head. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Miss Hartwell, he says, and his voice is pleasantly deep, with none of the high-pitched affectation of some of the other men. The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Thornfield. You respond, the practiced words falling from your lips automatically, though your heart is beating a little faster than before. And that's it. That is the entirety of your first interaction with a potential life partner. It lasts no more than 15 seconds. He moves on to be introduced to the next young lady, and your mother sweeps you away to meet a baronet's son who has a distracting twitch in his left eye. This isn't like a modern first meeting where you might have a deep, hours-long conversation, sharing stories and discovering common interests. Victorian introductions were brutally brief, intensely formal, and thoroughly supervised. You were meant to form a quick, surface-level impression. If a gentleman was interested, the proper follow-up was to call at your home at a designated time, with your parents present, of course, to continue the conversation under their watchful eyes. Finally, dinner is announced, and here comes another terrifying test. The seating arrangement is a delicate and brutal hierarchy, determined by social rank, title, and influence. You feel a wave of relief when you learn that your host's eldest son, Arthur, has been assigned to escort you into the dining room. This means you have been ranked somewhere in the respectable middle of the gathering, not so low as to be embarrassing, but not so presumptuously high as to attract negative attention. The dining room is a breathtaking spectacle of Victorian opulence. The long mahogany table gleams under the light of a dozen silver candelabras, its surface a glittering landscape of fine china, sparkling crystal, and an intimidating array of silverware. At each place setting sits a minefield of potential etiquette disasters. Multiple forks, spoons, and knives of varying sizes and shapes. You are seated between your escort, Arthur, and an older, whiskered gentleman who thankfully seems far more interested in the wine list than in making conversation with a 19-year-old girl. And then you see him, directly across the vast table, seated between a lady in purple and a stern-looking dowager, is Mr. Thornfield. He catches your eye for a brief moment and offers a small, almost imperceptible nod. In your head, you are screaming, "This is how I die." Not from some dramatic illness, but from the sheer, mortifying humiliation of accidentally using the fish fork for the meat course, or drinking from someone else's water glass, or, God forbid, dropping a piece of food on the pristine white tablecloth. The first course arrives, a clear turtle soup. A team of silent, efficient footmen place the bowls before each guest. You carefully select your soup spoon, the large, round one, thank God you remember, and delicately sip from the side of the spoon, never the tip and never ever making a slurping sound. One etiquette hurdle cleared. Only 11 more courses to go. The conversation around you is a low hum of polite inanities. Arthur, your dinner partner, is attempting to engage you in a discussion about the recent parliamentary debates, a topic you know is a trap. If you show too much knowledge, you are a blue stocking. If you show too little, you are an ignoramus. You navigate his questions with vague, non-committal answers, all while trying to eat your soup gracefully. Do you enjoy music, Miss Hartwell? The voice cuts through your concentration. It's Mr. Thornfield, speaking to you from across the table. His question, though simple, is a direct and public overture. Every eye in your immediate vicinity, including your mother's from 4 seats down, turns to you. This is a test. Say you love music too enthusiastically, and you might appear overeager and unsophisticated. Dismiss it, and you seem uncultured. You place your spoon down carefully. I appreciate fine music very much, Mr. Thornfield. You respond, your voice measured and calm. Though I confess I play only moderately well myself. It is the perfect answer, appreciative but modest. He nods, and you think you see a flicker of approval in his eyes. Perhaps you might be persuaded to play for us after dinner. Your stomach sinks like a stone. Playing the pianoforte for a room full of critical strangers is another one of the Victorian courtship rituals you have been dreading for years. It's a public audition of your accomplishments. But refusal is not an option. That would be seen as rude and ungracious. If Mrs. Chamberlain wishes it, I would be honored. You reply, the words tasting like ash in your mouth. Your mother, from her vantage point down the table, gives you a tiny, almost invisible nod of approval. You have navigated that exchange correctly. You have survived another round. The meal progresses like a slow, elaborate, and deeply stressful ballet. The soup is followed by poached salmon with hollandaise sauce. Then comes the roast beef with Yorkshire pudding. Then roasted game birds. Then an array of vegetables, aspics, and jellies. Palate-cleansing sorbets are served between the main courses. Wine, sherry, and champagne flow freely for the gentlemen, while the ladies are expected to take only a few small, delicate sips. Becoming intoxicated would be a social disaster of the highest, most catastrophic order. You are hyper-aware of your every movement. Your back is ramrod straight, not that the corset gives you any other choice. Your elbows are never to touch the table. You take tiny bites, chewing minimally and with your mouth firmly closed. You never reach for anything. You must wait for a footman to offer each dish to you. You must accept a small portion of everything, even if you despise it, to avoid offending your hostess. But you must never, ever finish everything on your plate, as that would suggest an unladylike hunger or, even worse, greed. It is utterly, profoundly exhausting. Unlike a casual modern dinner date where you might order whatever you want, laugh loudly, and actually enjoy eating, this Victorian dinner is an elaborate, high-stakes performance. The food is merely a prop in a play about propriety. By the 10th course, a complex dessert involving spun sugar and candied violets, you are lightheaded from the combined effects of the corset, the stress, and the lack of oxygen. But the night is far from over. After dinner, the ladies withdraw to the drawing room for tea and gossip, while the gentlemen remain in the dining room for port, cigars, and conversations deemed unsuitable for delicate female ears. You did very well with Mr. Thornfield. Your mother whispers as you sip your tea, her eyes shining with strategic triumph. He watched you throughout the entire meal. You feel a strange flutter of something in your chest. It's not quite excitement, and it's not quite dread. It's a new, unfamiliar feeling. Mr. Thornfield had seemed pleasant enough, certainly more intelligent and interesting than the other gentlemen you had met. But was that enough to build an entire life upon? When the gentlemen finally rejoined the ladies half an hour later, their faces flushed from the port, Mrs. Chamberlain does indeed make her way to you. "Miss Hartwell, my dear, we would be so delighted if you would play something for us on the pianoforte. This is it, the showcase. Your moment to display your accomplishments while simultaneously looking decorative and modest. You feel 100 pairs of eyes on you as you make your way to the grand piano in the corner of the room. You sit, arranging your voluminous skirts carefully, and place your trembling fingers on the cool ivory keys. You play a simple but pleasing melody by Chopin, one you have practiced so many times your fingers could play it in your sleep. You are not a virtuoso, but years of relentless practice have made you competent. As you play, you become acutely aware of a figure standing nearby. It's Mr. Thornfield. He is turning the pages of your sheet music for you, a small, conventional gesture of attentiveness. "You play with great feeling, Miss Hartwell," he says quietly when you finish, his voice audible only to you over the polite applause. "That is far more important than mere technical perfection, I think." You glance up at him, surprised. That is not the standard, empty compliment one usually receives. It's an actual observation, an opinion. "You are very kind to say so, Mr. Thornfield," you respond, carefully schooling your features not to show too much pleasure at his words. "Not kind," he corrects gently. "Merely honest. Tell me, do you enjoy reading as well as music?" Your mother's warning from this morning echoes in your mind like a commandment. Don't talk about those books you're always reading. But something in his expression, a genuine, unguarded interest, makes you take a risk. It makes you answer truthfully. "Yes," you say, your voice barely a whisper. "Very much." His eyes light up, not with polite acknowledgement, but with real enthusiasm. "Then we must find an opportunity to discuss books sometime. Perhaps when I call on your family." And there it is, the first crucial move in the Victorian courtship chess game. A gentleman has officially requested permission to visit you at your home. Your heart races, a wild, panicked bird in your chest, but outwardly you maintain a perfect, serene composure. "My parents welcome visitors on Tuesday afternoons between 3 and 5 o'clock. You say, the formal, rehearsed response coming automatically to your lips. He smiles, a genuine warm smile that transforms his serious face. He bows slightly and moves away to speak with another guest. The entire, life-altering exchange took less than 2 minutes, but it was enough. The wheels of courtship have officially been set in motion. By midnight, you are back home, so exhausted you can barely stand as Martha helps you unlace your corset. The relief as the laces are loosened is immediate, a rush of blood and air that is almost painful. You can finally take a deep, shuddering breath. "Well, miss, how was it?" Martha asks, helping you into your soft cotton nightgown. You think about the evening, The stress, the suffocation, the discomfort, the constant, draining awareness of being watched and judged. But then, you remember Mr. Thornfield's comment about reading. You remember the genuine, surprising interest in his eyes. It was, you search for the right word, the only word that seems to fit. A beginning. As you slide between the cold, damp sheets of your bed, you realize that Victorian courtship is a marathon, not a sprint. Tonight was just the first of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of carefully orchestrated social encounters that might, if everything goes perfectly, eventually lead to a marriage proposal. You drift off to sleep, your mind buzzing, wondering what books Mr. Thornfield likes to read, and whether Tuesday is too terribly far away. And as for you, lying in your comfortable, modern bed, with no corset in sight and no 12-course dinner to survive, be grateful. Be profoundly grateful that your worst dating disasters involve awkward text messages and bad coffee, rather than the ever-present threat of complete and utter social ruin. The Victorians somehow managed to find love, not in spite of the labyrinthine rules, but perhaps in some strange way because of them. The slow build of anticipation, the careful, strategic dance of approach and retreat, the electric thrill of a single meaningful glance across a crowded room. There was a certain magic there, even amidst the madness and the constraints. Sleep well, and dream of a time when the turn of a fan or the careful placement of a flower could speak volumes more than any dating profile ever could. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. Elellanena spent the 3 days following the Chamberlain's dinner party in a state of suspended animation, a purgatory of nervous, obsessive anticipation. Would Mr. Thornfield actually call? Had she simply imagined the spark of genuine interest in his eyes? Was her blue silk dress too forward? Was it not forward enough? Had she used the correct fork for the game course? The waiting game was a cornerstone of Victorian courtship, a form of refined torture designed to test a lady's patience and composure. It was a world away from today's culture of instant gratification. There were no, "Hey, I had a really great time last night," text messages to dissect with your friends. There was no social media profile to stalk, no checking to see if he was active online or had read your message. There was only silence, a vast, echoing silence filled with endless, maddening speculation. Your posture, Elellanena. Your mother reminded you sharply at breakfast on Monday morning, her eyes fixed on you over the rim of her teacup. A gentleman notices how a lady carries herself, even when she believes no one is watching. Elellanena immediately straightened her already straight spine, pushing her shoulders back until they ached. Even in the supposed privacy of her own home, the physical and psychological constraints of Victorian womanhood never relaxed. The performance was constant. You can feel your own shoulders slump in sympathy, imagining a life where you are constantly, relentlessly aware of your posture, your facial expressions, your every minute movement being scrutinized. Not just on dates, but all the time, every waking moment. Now, I have instructed Mrs. Wilson to prepare the good silver tea service for tomorrow afternoon, her mother continued, spreading a microscopically thin layer of marmalade on her toast. And we will have those small, delicate almond cakes from the French pâtisserie. Nothing too elaborate, of course. We do not want to appear as though we are trying too hard to impress him. The irony of this statement was so thick it was almost suffocating. Absolutely everything about Victorian courtship was designed to impress, while simultaneously, and with ferocious commitment, pretending not to care at all. It was an exhausting, contradictory performance. Of course, Mr. Thornfield may not be the only gentleman to call, her mother added with a tone of calculated casualness, as if the thought had just occurred to her. The Darlington boy, Brady, seemed quite taken with you as well. Elellanena had to physically suppress a grimace. Mr. Brady Darlington had indeed stared at her with unnerving intensity throughout the entire dinner party, but he had managed to speak exactly 3 words to her when they were introduced. Charmed, Miss Hartwell. He had a weak chin and an air of entitled boredom. He was not, in her opinion, the foundation for a lifetime of affection, regardless of his family connections. Mother, Elellanena ventured carefully, testing the waters. Do you think it would be proper to discuss books with Mr. Thornfield? Should he call? He did express. Her mother's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. A passing comment, I am sure, made out of politeness. Gentlemen prefer to lead the conversation. Elellanena. A few modest, well-chosen opinions on your part are acceptable, but remember what I have told you. Men do not marry women who challenge them intellectually. They marry women who soothe them. That night, lying in her cold bed, Elellanena stared at the canopy above her and whispered into the darkness. But what if I want someone who welcomes a challenge? In your cozy modern bed, you're probably screaming, "Just be yourself, girl. Find someone who loves you for you." But in Victorian England in 1862, being yourself was a luxury and a dangerous one at that, if yourself did not conform to a very narrow, very specific set of societal standards. Tuesday morning finally dawned, bright and surprisingly clear, a rare gift in perpetually smoggy London. Elellanena was awake long before Martha arrived with the morning water, too jittery and nervous to sleep. The formal at-home hours for receiving morning calls were between 3 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but the preparations began much, much earlier. The entire house was in an uproar of controlled, purposeful activity. Maids were on their hands and knees, polishing the silver tea service until it gleamed, dusting every ornament and picture frame in the drawing room, and arranging freshly cut flowers in elegant vases. The cook was in the kitchen, preparing the delicate almond cakes and paper-thin cucumber sandwiches. Even Elellenena's father had been politely banished to his gentleman's club for the afternoon. Morning calls were a strictly feminine affair, a ritual conducted by and for women, with the gentleman caller as the honored guest and subject of scrutiny. Your green day dress, I think, her mother decided after a lengthy wardrobe consultation following breakfast. The one with the modest lace collar. It is fashionable, but not too showy. Martha helped Elellanena dress with even more care than usual. The green dress was mercifully lighter than her formal dinner gown, though it was still layered over a tightly laced corset and several petticoats. Her hair was arranged simply but elegantly, a cascade of soft curls framing her face. It was the carefully constructed Victorian version of, "I woke up like this." "You look lovely, miss," Martha said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Not too eager, but pretty enough to catch any gentleman's eye. That was the perpetual, exhausting tightrope walk of the Victorian maiden. To be attractive without seeming to try, to be interested without appearing forward, to be accomplished without being threatening. Modern dating has its own set of confusing rules and complications, but at least you can send a text message saying, "I had a great time last night," without risking your entire social standing. By 2 o'clock, Elellanena was seated in the drawing room with her mother. Both were ostensibly working on their embroidery, a perfectly ladylike and respectable activity. But her stomach was twisted into such a tight knot of nerves, she could barely hold the needle steady. The embroidery hoop served a dual purpose. It provided something to do with her trembling hands, and more importantly, it was an acceptable pastime that could be quickly and gracefully set aside the moment a visitor was announced. "Remember to keep the conversation light," her mother reminded her for what must have been the 10th time. The weather, music, perhaps a new exhibition at the Royal Academy, if the gentleman seems cultured. Nothing controversial. No politics, no religion, and certainly no talk of novels with questionable moral themes. "Yes, mother," Elellanena replied automatically, her voice a monotone of rehearsed obedience. She pricked her finger with the needle for the 3rd time. A tiny drop of crimson blood welled up, and she quickly pressed her handkerchief to it. A blood stain on her pristine embroidery would be noticed. It would be remarked upon. It could be interpreted as carelessness or a lack of composure, qualities that no Victorian gentleman wanted in a prospective wife. The ornate mantel clock on the fireplace ticked with a loud, deliberate rhythm, each second stretching into an eternity. 3 o'clock came and went. No visitors. "It is still early," her mother said, her own needle moving with a steady, unbothered rhythm through the fabric. "Callers of quality often come later in the afternoon. It is considered more fashionable." 3:15. The ticking of the clock grew louder, more mocking. 3:30. Nothing but the distant rumble of carriages on the street outside. Elellenena's hopes, which had been so cautiously high, began to sink into a pit of despair. She had misinterpreted Mr. Thornfield's interest entirely. He had only been polite. Or worse, he had thought about it and decided against pursuing an acquaintance with a girl who admitted to enjoying books. Her mother had been right all along. Then, at precisely 3:45, the sharp, authoritative clang of the doorbell echoed through the house. Both women froze for a split second. Their eyes met. Then, with deliberate, practiced slowness, they both returned their gaze to their embroidery. To appear eager was the cardinal sin of Victorian courtship. A lady never rushed to the door. A lady never showed even a flicker of excitement at a caller's arrival. That was what servants were for. Their butler, Harrison, a man so formal he seemed to have been carved from granite, appeared at the drawing room door moments later. He carried a small, ornate silver tray, and resting upon it was a single, crisp white card. A calling card. "Mr. James Thornfield," he announced, his voice a deep, solemn monotone. Elellanina's mother nodded with the regal air of a queen granting an audience. "We will receive him, Harrison. Now hold up. Let me explain just how monumental a deal this small, rectangular piece of cardstock was. In Victorian society, calling cards were serious business. They were the original social network, a complex system of communication and gatekeeping. A gentleman's card was simple and rectangular, bearing only his name and perhaps his club. A lady's card was larger, more square, and often more ornate. When Mr. Thornfield handed his card to Harrison, he was formally requesting permission to cross the threshold and enter their private, domestic space. Had Elellanina's mother been unimpressed by him at the dinner party, or had she heard some unflattering gossip about him, she could have instructed Harrison to say, "The ladies are not at home." This was the universally understood polite fiction used to refuse a caller without causing an outright, socially awkward rejection. But she had accepted his card. This was the first small, but crucial victory in the delicate dance of courtship. Harrison returned moments later, this time followed by Mr. Thornfield himself. He stood formally in the doorway, a tall and composed figure, until invited further into the room. "Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell," he said, bowing slightly. "I hope I find you both well." "Quite well, thank you, Mr. Thornfield," Elellanina's mother replied, her voice smooth as silk. "Please do be seated." He sat in the chair she indicated, a stiff-backed armchair placed opposite the sofa where Elellanena and her mother were seated. The distance was perfectly calculated, close enough for easy conversation, but far enough to remain properly, unimpeachably respectable. Every single piece of furniture, every physical position in the Victorian drawing room was a carefully calibrated element in the theater of propriety. "We are so pleased you could call," her mother continued, finally setting aside her embroidery. "Elellanena, dear, perhaps you might be so kind as to pour the tea." This was no small request. It was another test. Pouring tea correctly, without spilling a drop, without clattering the china, without seeming flustered, was considered a key display of a young lady's grace and domestic accomplishment. Elellanena moved to the small tea table, her heart hammering against her ribs, profoundly grateful that her hands were not visibly shaking as she lifted the heavy, ornate silver teapot. "How do you take your tea, Mr. Thornfield?" she asked, immensely proud of her steady, even voice. "Just a touch of milk, if you please." "No sugar," he replied, and she was acutely aware of his eyes watching her hands as she prepared the cup. The ritual of tea serving was elaborate, precise, and deeply meaningful. As Elellanena handed him the delicate porcelain cup and saucer, she was careful to ensure that their fingers did not touch for even a fraction of a second. Such contact would be scandalously, ruinously forward. She noticed him studying her face with a quiet, thoughtful interest. "I trust you have been enjoying this spell of fine weather, Mr. Thornfield," her mother asked, officially launching into the mandatory, and often excruciatingly dull, discussion of meteorological conditions that began all proper Victorian conversations. "Indeed, Mrs. Hartwell," he replied politely, "though I confess I have been too occupied with business matters to fully appreciate it." For the next 15 minutes, an eternity in a room thick with unspoken tension, Elellanena sat in near silence. She listened as her mother and Mr. Thornfield exchanged pleasantries about the weather, about mutual acquaintances, and about a concert at St. James's Hall the previous evening. This was standard procedure. The first part of any gentleman's call was directed by the senior lady present, in this case, her mother. The daughter was expected to sit quietly, look decorative, and speak only when directly addressed. My daughter was quite impressed by the Chamberlain's musical selections the other evening. Weren't you, Elellanena? This was her cue, her moment to enter the conversation. She had to do so carefully, modestly, and without appearing too eager for his attention. The Mozart was particularly well chosen, Elellanena offered, a safe and respectable opinion. Mr. Thornfield's expression brightened with genuine interest. Do you enjoy Mozart, Miss Hartwell? I find his compositions most pleasing, she replied, the bland, formal statement masking the genuine, passionate enthusiasm she felt for music. As do I, he said, though I must confess a preference for the Passion of Beethoven. He glanced at Mrs. Hartwell, as if checking whether such a strong, emotional statement was acceptable in mixed company. Elellanenna's mother gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, granting permission for the conversation to continue in this slightly more personal vein. And what of literature, Miss Hartwell? Mr. Thornfield asked, his gaze returning to her. He was returning to the topic they had briefly, riskily, broached at the dinner party. Have you read anything of note recently? Elellanena hesitated. Her mother's stern warning, *men don't marry women who challenge them intellectually*, echoed in her mind. But something in Mr. Thornfield's expression, an earnestness, a genuine curiosity that seemed to transcend mere polite conversation, emboldened her. She decided to take another risk. I have recently finished reading The Mill on the Floss, she admitted, her voice dropping slightly. Though perhaps I should not confess to reading such modern novels. In your head, you're probably thinking George Eliot? That's her big, scandalous secret. But you have to understand, in 1862, reading contemporary novels, especially those by female authors writing under male pseudonyms that dealt with complex moral questions and female intellectual frustration, was not considered entirely proper for young, unmarried ladies. They were supposed to stick to improving religious texts, poetry by Tennyson, and perhaps a bit of Jane Austen. Mr. Thornfield's eyes lit up with that same surprising enthusiasm she had seen at the dinner party. George Eliot has a remarkable, almost unnerving insight into human nature, he replied, his voice animated. Though I must confess I found the ending rather tragic. Do you prefer happier conclusions in your reading, Miss Hartwell? Before Elellanena could formulate an answer, her mother interjected smoothly, her voice like cool silk. My daughter has always had a particular fondness for poetry. Perhaps you might recommend some suitable volumes for her, Mr. Thornfield. Something appropriately uplifting, of course. And just like that, with the skill of a master diplomat, the conversation was expertly steered back to safer, more conventional waters. Elellanena shot Mr. Thornfield a quick, apologetic glance, which he acknowledged with a slight, understanding smile. He understood. He saw the maneuver. The remainder of the visit, which lasted precisely half an hour, the socially acceptable duration for a first call, passed in pleasant but carefully controlled conversation. As it concluded, Mr. Thornfield stood and bowed. Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, thank you for your most gracious hospitality. Might I have the pleasure of calling again next week? We are at home on Tuesdays and Thursdays, her mother replied. It was the standard, non-committal formula, neither directly accepting nor rejecting his request, but leaving the door open for him to try again. After Harrison had shown him out, Elellanenna's mother turned to her, her expression one of deep satisfaction. Well, that was most promising. He is clearly a gentleman of taste and discernment, and his manners are impeccable. She paused, fixing Elellanena with a pointed look. Though I would caution you against appearing too learned, Elellanena. A gentleman appreciates refinement in a wife, not blue-stocking tendencies. Elellanena nodded obediently, her face a mask of placid agreement. But internally, she was replaying the moment when Mr. Thornfield's eyes had lit up at the mention of George Eliot. Perhaps, just perhaps, not all gentlemen wanted mindless, decorative companions after all. The following day brought a small flurry of other calling cards. Word had clearly spread through the intricate gossip network of London society that Elellanena Hartwell had made a favorable impression at the Chamberlain's dinner. 3 different gentlemen, including the persistent Mr. Darlington, left their cards while she and her mother were out paying their own obligatory calls. Because yes, that's another exhausting aspect of Victorian social life. Women also made formal calls on other women, usually returning visits from those who had called on them first. It was a never-ending, intricate cycle of social obligation, with a labyrinth of strict rules about who called on whom, how long one should stay, and how soon a visit must be returned. Mr. Darlington, Mr. Peters, and a Mr. Sullivan. Her mother read from the cards when they returned home that afternoon, her voice filled with triumph. All from very good families. The season is progressing very well for you, Elellanena. The following week was a whirlwind of social engagements. Another dinner party, a musical evening, and an afternoon garden party. It was at the garden party that Elellanena caught sight of Mr. Thornfield from across a vast, manicured lawn. They only managed to exchange a brief, polite greeting, but the moment was charged with unspoken significance. That's how Victorian courtship often progressed. In tantalizing glimpses and fleeting moments, building anticipation and interest through a series of carefully orchestrated near-misses. "Miss Hartwell," he said when they were briefly, accidentally thrown together at the refreshment table, away from the immediate earshot of her mother. "I have been reading Tennyson's latest volume. I thought of your expressed interest in poetry. Have you found it enjoyable?" she asked, acutely aware of at least 3 matrons watching their interaction with the hawkish interest of seasoned ornithologists. "Indeed, perhaps we might discuss it in more detail when I call tomorrow." "I should look forward to it," she replied, her voice carefully neutral, before she was immediately whisked away by her mother to be introduced to an elderly and very deaf countess. These tiny, stolen exchanges, these fragments of connection, were the real building blocks of Victorian romance. There were no long, intimate conversations over coffee, no private text messages to share thoughts and feelings. There were only these public glimpses, these brief, supervised encounters that had to slowly, gradually, and against all odds, build a foundation of interest and affection. When Tuesday came again, Elellanena found herself genuinely, eagerly looking forward to Mr. Thornfield's call. This time, she chose her own dress, a vibrant blue-green silk that complemented her eyes far better than the plain, modest green her mother had selected the week before. "That is rather a bright color for morning calls, Elellanena," her mother commented, her eyebrow raised in disapproval. "It is my favorite color," Elellanena replied simply, a small but significant act of rebellion. Her mother sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. "Very well. But do try to keep the conversation more general today. Mr. Thornfield seemed altogether too interested in your opinions on literature last week. As if that were a bad thing, you're thinking. And you're absolutely right. By modern standards, a man being genuinely interested in a woman's thoughts and opinions is the bare minimum requirement for a decent human being. But in Victorian society, it was somewhat unusual, even potentially threatening to the established social order. When Mr. Thornfield arrived, at precisely the same time as his previous visit, a sign of his reliability and good manners, Elellanena noted with a small thrill of pleasure that he was carrying a small, neatly wrapped package. After the initial greetings and the now familiar tea-pouring ritual, he said, "Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you will forgive the liberty, but I have brought a small volume of poetry that I thought Miss Hartwell might enjoy." He presented the package not to Elellanena directly, but to her mother. Proper Victorian etiquette demanded that all gifts to an unmarried woman, no matter how small, be presented to and approved by her mother or chaperone first. Her mother unwrapped it carefully, her expression unreadable. It was a slim, elegantly bound volume of Tennyson's Enoch Arden and other poems, which had only recently been published. "How very thoughtful of you, Mr. Thornfield," she said, examining the book for a moment before passing it to Elellanena. "My daughter is quite fond of poetry, as I may have mentioned." Elellanena accepted the book, her fingers brushing against the cool leather of the cover. She was careful not to appear too eager or overly pleased. "Thank you, Mr. Thornfield. This is most kind. I have taken the liberty of marking a few passages that I found particularly moving," he said, his eyes meeting hers for a brief, significant moment. "Though I should be most interested to hear your opinion." He was doing it again. He was asking for her thoughts, her genuine, unvarnished opinions. In the highly restricted, heavily codified world of Victorian courtship, this was practically a declaration of revolutionary intent. "I shall be sure to read it with great care," she promised. Their eyes met again, and in that silent, fleeting moment, something profound passed between them. It was a sense of understanding, of connection, of shared possibility. Elellanena quickly looked away, keenly conscious of her mother's watchful, analytical gaze. The rest of the visit proceeded much like the first, though this time, Elellenena's mother allowed the conversation to linger on the topic of literature for a bit longer before skillfully steering it toward the upcoming, highly anticipated ball at Thornton House. "I believe you are acquainted with the Thorntons, are you not, Mr. Thornfield?" her mother inquired. "Indeed, Sir William and I share some business interests," he replied. "Their annual ball is always a highlight of the season. Elellanena has just received her invitation," her mother said, a note of pride in her voice. Being invited to the Thornton ball was a significant mark of social acceptance, a sign that the Hartwell family was considered part of the inner circle of London society. "Perhaps you might be persuaded to request a dance, Mr. Thornfield." This was a bold, almost forward move, even for an ambitious mother. But Mrs. Hartwell clearly saw the promising potential in Mr. Thornfield and was not about to let the opportunity slip away. "It would be my greatest honor," he replied, his gaze shifting to Elellanena. "If Miss Hartwell would do me the kindness of saving me a space on her dance card." "I should be delighted, Mr. Thornfield," Elellanena said, the formal, rehearsed response belying the wild, joyful flutter in her chest. As Mr. Thornfield prepared to leave, having once again stayed for exactly half an hour, he made one final, significant move. "Mrs. Hartwell, would you and Miss Hartwell permit me to escort you to the Phillipses' musical soiree on Friday evening? I understand it is to be a small, intimate gathering, and I believe we are all on the guest list." This was a major step forward in the courtship process. A gentleman offering to formally escort a young lady and her chaperone to a social event indicated a serious, public interest. It was not quite a declaration of intent to marry, but it was certainly far more than a casual acquaintance. Her mother beamed, her face glowing with satisfaction. "How very kind of you to offer, Mr. Thornfield. We would be most pleased to accept your escort." After he had left, her mother was practically vibrating with triumph. "Well, Elellanena, it seems Mr. Thornfield is quite taken with you indeed. An escort to the Phillipses' soiree, a dance promised at the Thornton ball. These are not the attentions of a casual admirer." Elellanena ran her fingers over the smooth leather cover of the poetry book. "He seems different from the other gentlemen, Mother." "Different?" Her mother frowned slightly. "In what way?" "He appears to be genuinely interested in conversation," Elellanena said carefully. "In ideas." Her mother looked thoughtful for a moment. "Well, he is somewhat older than the other young men, perhaps nearly 30. More established gentlemen can sometimes afford to be a bit unconventional. But you must mind what I say. Do not encourage too much intellectual discussion, Elellanena. A gentleman may enjoy the novelty of a clever comment or two from a young lady, but for marriage, for a lifetime, they want someone soothing and agreeable." That night, alone in her room, Elellanena lit an extra candle and opened the book Mr. Thornfield had given her. She found that several pages were marked not with ink, but with tiny, almost invisible pencil dots in the margins, marks that could be easily erased, leaving no evidence for prying maternal eyes. Smart man, she thought with a small smile. The marked passages were beautiful, powerful lines of poetry about courage, about conviction, and about seeing beyond the shallow constraints of society. Was he sending her a secret message? Or was she just a hopeful girl, reading too much into a simple, polite gift? Elellanena fell asleep that night with the book of poetry resting beside her pillow, dreaming of conversations that might one day be possible, conversations that went far beyond the restrictive, suffocating confines of the drawing room. In a world where courtship proceeded at a glacial pace through a series of rigidly controlled public encounters, the simple gift of a book with a few secretly marked passages felt almost scandalously, thrillingly intimate. As for you, drifting off to sleep in your modern bed, take a moment to imagine a world where a shared literary reference was as exciting and meaningful as a first kiss. A world where the accidental brush of gloved fingers during a teacup exchange could send hearts racing for days. Victorian courtship may have been ridiculously, maddeningly formal, but perhaps there is something to be said for the slow, delicious burn of carefully cultivated anticipation. In our next chapter, Elellanena will discover that there is far more to Victorian flirtation than just calling cards and chaperone visits. The secret, silent languages of fans, flowers, and gloves allowed couples to communicate, to flirt, and even to fall in love, right under the very noses of their ever-watchful chaperones. It was a Victorian workaround, a clever hack in a system filled with rules. Sleep well, and maybe, just maybe, consider sending that person you're interested in a book instead of a text message tomorrow. Some courtship traditions are worth reviving, even if we are all profoundly grateful to have left the corsets in the past. Friday evening arrived, and with it, the Phillipses' musical soiree. For Elellanena, this event marked a significant, nerve-wracking milestone in her burgeoning courtship. It was her first public appearance with Mr. Thornfield acting as their official escort. This was not quite a declaration of engagement, but it was a clear, unambiguous statement to the rest of London society that he had a particular, serious interest in the Hartwell family, and more specifically, in Miss Hartwell. Remember Elellanena? Her mother coached as Martha expertly arranged her hair into an intricate cascade of curls. It is acceptable to show some animation during the musical performances, but you must never display excessive emotion. A gentle, appreciative smile, perhaps a slight, ladle-like swaying to the rhythm of the music. Nothing more. The rules for public behavior were exhaustingly, microscopically specific. Every gesture, every facial expression was coded and freighted with meaning. Unlike today, where you might post an enthusiastic video of yourself dancing at a concert or text a friend, "OMG, that was amazing!" A Victorian's feelings had to be communicated through a series of subtle, almost imperceptible signals. "And your fan," her mother continued, holding up the delicate accessory, crafted from intricately carved ivory and fine lace. "You must use it judiciously tonight." Oh, the fan. That innocent-looking, beautiful accessory was, in reality, one of the most powerful and versatile communication tools in a Victorian woman's arsenal. In a society where direct speech was severely restricted, where unmarried couples were never, ever allowed to be alone, and where every spoken word was monitored and analyzed, the secret language of the fan offered a silent, clandestine pathway to express feelings that could never be spoken aloud. "I believe I have had quite enough of the lessons on fan etiquette, Mother," Elellanena said, a note of weariness creeping into her voice. She immediately regretted her sharp tone. Her mother raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Clearly not, if you are taking that tone with me. The fan is not merely an instrument for cooling oneself, Elellanena. To those who understand its language, it speaks volumes." You're probably rolling your eyes in your cozy modern bed, thinking this sounds utterly ridiculous. But take a moment and truly imagine it. Imagine being watched constantly, your every word and action scrutinized and judged. You would develop secret codes, too. It's human nature. "Now," her mother demonstrated, snapping open the fan and beginning to fan herself with a slow, graceful rhythm. This indicates that you are engaged to be married, but it can also mean you are available for conversation. Fanning quickly, she sped up the motion. Suggests agitation or that you are married, and is to be avoided unless you are deliberately signaling distress. Closing the fan and tapping it against your palm means, "I wish to speak with you." Elellanena sighed inwardly. She had been drilled in the complex syntax and grammar of fan language since she was 15 years old. But her mother never tired of refreshing the lessons before any important social event. Drawing the fan across your cheek, Her mother continued, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, means, I love you, a gesture which you will absolutely not, under any circumstances, be making this evening. Mother, I hardly think. The language of the fan is both powerful and incredibly dangerous. Elellanena. One wrong movement, one careless gesture, and your reputation could be irrevocably compromised. Do you remember Lady Ainsworth's youngest daughter from last season? One thoughtless fan gesture, interpreted by society as a brazen declaration of affection, and she found herself forced into an engagement with a man she scarcely knew, simply to avoid a scandal. That shut Elellanena up. The story, whether true or merely a cautionary tale, served its purpose. Victorian courtship wasn't just a romantic game. It was a high-stakes battle for survival in a society where women had desperately few options outside of marriage, and where reputation was everything. When Mr. Thornfield arrived to escort them, punctual as always, Elellanena noted with a flutter of interest that he carried a small, elegant bouquet. It wasn't a large, ostentatious arrangement, but a tasteful, carefully chosen collection of flowers, tied with a simple silk ribbon. Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell. He greeted them with a formal bow, his eyes lingering on Elellanena for a moment. You both look lovely this evening. I took the liberty of bringing these for Miss Hartwell. He presented the bouquet not to Elellanena, but to her mother. Once again, proper etiquette dictated that all gifts, especially ones with such potential for meaning, must first pass through the chaperone's hands. Her mother accepted the bouquet and examined it with a knowing, analytical eye. How very thoughtful of you, Mr. Thornfield. Quite a charming selection. She then handed the flowers to Elellanena, who received them with a carefully modulated expression of pleasure. Not too eager, not too indifferent. Thank you, Mr. Thornfield, she said, her voice soft. They are beautiful, and they were. The bouquet was a tasteful, artistic arrangement of pure white roses, delicate blue forget-me-nots, and tiny, bell-shaped lilies of the valley. Tucked almost invisibly among the larger blooms was a single, fragrant sprig of myrtle. To the casual, untrained observer, it was simply a pretty collection of flowers. But to anyone versed in the popular and intricate art of florography, the secret language of flowers, the message was as clear and articulate as a written letter. White roses symbolized innocence and charm. Forget-me-nots, as their name suggests, stood for true love and remembrance. Lily of the valley conveyed sweetness and the return of happiness. And the myrtle, the most telling and significant inclusion of all, was the traditional symbol of love and, more specifically, of marriage. Elellannena's cheeks warmed slightly as she instantly decoded the message. Mr. Thornfield was no amateur at the complex game of courtship. He was communicating with her, in the most proper yet unmistakable way possible, that his intentions were serious and honorable. I shall put these in water before we depart, she said, not quite meeting his eyes, feeling suddenly shy. Allow me, Miss Elellanena, Martha said, appearing as if from nowhere to take the bouquet. She gave Elellanena a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. Martha, like most experienced ladies' maids, was as well versed in the symbolism of flowers as any society hostess. Nothing escaped her notice. Shall we? Mr. Thornfield offered his arm to Mrs. Hartwell, as was proper. Elellanena would follow a few steps behind, maintaining the public appearance that it was her mother, the married chaperone, whom he was primarily escorting. The Phillipses' home in Mayfair was already crowded when they arrived. Musical soirees were smaller, more intimate affairs than grand balls, but they were still significant social events, with perhaps 40 or 50 of London's elite gathered in the grand drawing room. A string quartet played softly in one corner while clusters of elegantly dressed people conversed in hushed, polite tones. Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, Mr. Thornfield, Mrs. Phillips, their hostess, greeted them warmly. How delightful you could come. We are just about to begin the first performance. They were shown to a set of chairs near the center of the room, a clear mark of their social status. Elellanena sat beside her mother, with Mr. Thornfield seated on her mother's other side. Even here, in this formal setting, An unmarried man and woman would not sit directly next to each other. As the first performer, a young lady with a passable but slightly sharp soprano voice began to sing an Italian aria. Elellanena felt a strange, prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the distinct feeling of being watched. Glancing discreetly around the room from beneath her lashes, she caught the eye of Mr. Darlington. He was standing near the fireplace, and his gaze was fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. He nodded slightly. Elellanena quickly returned her attention to the singer, feeling a profound sense of discomfort under his scrutiny. When the song ended, she applauded politely, then gracefully opened her fan, the signal that she was engaged in listening but was open to conversation during the interludes. During the brief intermission between performances, Mr. Thornfield made his way over to their seats. "Miss Hartwell, are you enjoying the music?" he asked, standing at a properly respectful distance. "Very much," she replied. "Miss Thompson has a lovely voice." "Indeed." He paused, his eyes twinkling slightly. "I see you have brought your fan this evening." Elellanina's heart quickened. Was he acknowledging that he, too, understood the secret language of the fan? "It can be rather warm in these crowded rooms," she said carefully, offering the conventional, safe explanation. "Indeed it can," he agreed, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "One must have ways to remain comfortable, while still, of course, observing all the proper proprieties." Before she could formulate a response to this cleverly coded remark, Mr. Darlington approached, inserting himself into their conversation with barely a nod of acknowledgement to Mr. Thornfield. "Miss Hartwell, you look utterly charming this evening," he said, his voice a little too loud, standing a little too close. "That particular shade of blue is most becoming." "Thank you, Mr. Darlington," Elellanena replied, instinctively closing her fan partially, the signal that she wished to speak to him, but not alone. Mr. Darlington either didn't know the subtleties of fan language or, more likely, he simply chose to ignore them. "I had hoped to see you at Lady Russell's garden party yesterday," he said, his tone suggesting a mild accusation. "We had a prior engagement," Elellanena said, glancing at her mother, hoping for a rescue. But Mrs. Hartwell was now deep in conversation with an elderly and very wealthy matron and didn't notice her daughter's predicament. Mr. Thornfield, however, did. "I believe the next performance is about to begin," he interjected smoothly. "Miss Hartwell, might I escort you back to your seat?" "Thank you, Mr. Thornfield," Elellanena said with a wave of profound gratitude. She accepted his offered arm, taking advantage of one of the few instances where such a physical connection was permitted, the brief, public escort of a lady back to her seat in a crowded room. As they moved through the small cluster of people, Elellanena felt Mr. Thornfield discreetly slip something small and folded into the palm of her gloved hand. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a note. The passing of secret notes was a scandalously forward, almost reckless act, an action that could be potentially ruinous to her reputation if it were observed by the wrong person. With her heart pounding against her ribs, she quickly and discreetly tucked the tiny piece of paper into the palm of her glove. The Victorian glove was yet another tool of secret, silent communication. Messages could be hidden within them, and the very way one wore, adjusted, or even dropped a glove could send a specific signal. Dropping a glove, for instance, was a bold invitation for a gentleman to pick it up, and in doing so, publicly declare his interest. Once she was seated again beside her mother, Elellanena had to endure the entire next performance, an interminable pianoforte piece that seemed to have no end, before she could risk reading the note. During the enthusiastic applause that followed, she pretended to adjust the fit of her glove, and with deft, practiced movements, unfolded the tiny piece of paper. In a neat, strong, masculine hand were written just 4 words. *library. After next song. Elellanena nearly gasped aloud. He was suggesting they meet, privately, unchaperoned. It was a shocking, audacious breach of propriety, an act so dangerous it could destroy her reputation if they were discovered. Yet, despite the terror, a thrill of pure, exhilarating excitement coursed through her veins. This was real. This was happening. She glanced across the room at Mr. Thornfield, who was watching her intently. He raised a single eyebrow slightly, a silent question. In response, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly, she touched her closed fan to her right cheek, the signal for yes. For the next 15 minutes, Elellanena could barely focus on the music. Her mind was racing with a potent cocktail of exhilaration and trepidation. Meeting a man unchaperoned, even for a few fleeting moments, was playing with fire. Yet, she found herself counting the seconds, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, until she could reasonably excuse herself. When the song finally ended, she leaned toward her mother. "I find I need to visit the ladies' retiring room," she whispered, using the delicate Victorian euphemism for the lavatory. Her mother nodded absently, her attention still focused on the performers. "Do not be long." Elellanena made her way gracefully out of the crowded drawing room, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone must be able to hear it. The Phillipses' library was down the main hall. She had visited this house before on a formal call with her mother and knew its layout. Glancing quickly up and down the empty corridor to ensure no one was watching, she slipped inside the dimly lit, book-lined room and gently closed the door behind her. Mr. Thornfield was already there, standing by the tall window that overlooked the darkened garden. He turned as she entered, his expression a complex mixture of relief and genuine concern. "Miss Hartwell," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper, "I feared you would not come." "This is most improper, Mr. Thornfield," Elellanena whispered back, her hand still on the doorknob, staying near the door as a small symbolic measure of safety. "If we are discovered—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "Believe me, I would not risk your reputation for anything less than a matter of great importance. But I needed to speak with you, just for a moment, away from the prying ears and the watching eyes." Elellanena glanced nervously at the closed door. "We have perhaps 2 minutes before my absence is noted and questions are asked." Mr. Thornfield nodded, moving a single step closer. He still maintained a properly respectable distance, but they were now close enough that they could speak in hushed, intimate tones. "I wanted to be certain that you understood the message in the flowers I brought this evening," he said, his gaze direct and serious. "Sometimes, these symbols can be misinterpreted or dismissed as mere convention." "Oh, you're wondering if he's about to backtrack, aren't you? Lying in your bed in the 21st century, you're probably thinking he's going to give her some kind of excuse, some Victorian version of, 'It's not you, it's me.' The inclusion of the myrtle was perhaps too forward," he continued, his voice earnest. "But I wanted to be perfectly clear about my intentions, Miss Hartwell. I find you to be quite unlike any other young lady I have ever had the pleasure of meeting." Elellanina's pulse quickened. "In what way? You have a mind of your own. You read George Eliot," he said with a small, wry smile. "You do not merely parrot the safe, conventional opinions you have been taught to hold. Many gentlemen would consider that a great fault in a woman," she said carefully, testing him. "I am not many gentlemen," he replied simply, the words landing with a quiet, profound weight. "I seek a partner in life, Miss Hartwell, not a decorative ornament." The word partner hung in the air between them. It was a radical, almost revolutionary concept in a society where wives were, in the eyes of the law, legally considered the property of their husbands. "Mr. Thornfield, James," he said quietly, his voice gentle but firm. "My name is James." The use of his Christian name was another significant boundary crossed. It was an act of profound intimacy, a step into a personal space that was strictly forbidden in public. In society, they would remain Mr. Thornfield and Miss Hartwell until the day an engagement was formally announced. But here, in this stolen, secret moment, they were stepping beyond society's rigid, suffocating formalities. "James," Elellanena said, testing the name on her lips, felt both strange and wonderful. I should return before I am missed." "Yes, of course," he nodded. "But first—" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, glittering object, pressing it into her gloved hand. A small token, For your fan. Elellanena glanced down. Resting in her palm was a tiny silver charm, the kind that could be decoratively attached to a fan's ribbon. It was in the shape of a miniature, exquisitely detailed book. The message could not have been clearer. He valued her mind. He valued her love of reading. He valued her. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling deeply, profoundly moved by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "We should return separately," he said, his mind practical, even in the midst of the emotional intensity of the moment. "Wait 2 minutes after I leave before you exit the library." Elellanena nodded, her mind reeling. She carefully tucked the tiny charm into her glove alongside the folded note. More secrets to hide. More coded, precious messages to cherish. After he had slipped silently from the room, she counted slowly to 120. Her hand pressed against her chest, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She composed her features into an expression of serene neutrality before she re-entered the drawing room. Her mother gave her a sharp, questioning look as she took her seat. "You were gone for quite some time," she observed, her tone suspicious. "There was a line for the retiring room." Elellanena lied smoothly, feeling a sharp, unfamiliar twinge of guilt. She had never actively deceived her mother before. Yet here she was, her gloves filled with hidden notes and secret charms, her mind buzzing with the memory of a clandestine meeting. But that was the nature of Victorian courtship. It was a constant, exhausting dance between public propriety and private, burgeoning connection, between the ironclad rules of society and the deeply personal desires of the heart. The elaborate, secret codes of fans and flowers and gloves existed precisely because the official rules were so restrictive that couples were forced to find alternative, clever means of communication. The rest of the evening passed in a dizzying blur. Elellanena was hyper-aware of James's presence across the room, of the solid weight of the tiny silver charm in her glove, of the secret that now existed between them, a shared, invisible thread connecting them across the crowded space. When he escorted them home later that night, everything on the surface was perfectly, unimpeachably proper. He handed Mrs. Hartwell down from the carriage with formal grace. He bowed at their front door. He thanked them for the pleasure of their company. Yet, when he took Elellenena's gloved hand to help her from the carriage, his fingers pressed hers for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was another silent, secret message, a gesture that meant everything to her and would be completely invisible to any outside observers. "Until the Thornton ball," he said as he departed. "I believe you have promised me a dance, Miss Hartwell." "Indeed, I have, Mr. Thornfield," she replied, the formal, conventional words belying the warmth and promise that shone in her eyes. Once she was safely in her bedroom, with Martha helping her to undress, Elellanena finally had a chance to examine the charm properly. It was exquisitely made, the tiny pages of the silver book delicately engraved. It was clearly expensive despite its small size. "That is a lovely little trinket, Miss," Martha commented, her sharp eyes missing nothing as she unlaced Elellenena's corset. "A gift." "Yes," Elellanena admitted, seeing no point in trying to hide it from Martha, who was her confidant and ally in this complex campaign. "From Mr. Thornfield." Martha smiled knowingly as the corset finally came loose. "He seems a good sort, that one. Not like that Mr. Darlington who keeps calling. There is something not quite right about that man, if you don't mind my saying so, miss." "I don't mind at all, Martha," Elellanena said, breathing deeply and freely for the first time in hours. "I find Mr. Darlington to be rather intense. Some might call it persistent," Martha observed, helping Elellanena into her soft nightgown. "Some might call it something else entirely." Elellanena sat at her vanity as Martha began to brush out her long hair, the repetitive, soothing strokes a comfort after the tension of the evening. "What do you mean?" "Just that Mr. Darlington has been asking questions about you, in the servants' hall when he calls. Wants to know your habits, your preferences, where you go. It's more than the usual interest, if you take my meaning, miss." This was concerning. The servants' network was an invisible but incredibly powerful force in Victorian society. Information flowed freely below stairs, from house to house, carried by grooms, cooks, and maids. For a gentleman to be pressing servants for details about a young lady was a serious overstepping of social boundaries. "Thank you for telling me, Martha," Elellanena said thoughtfully. "I shall be careful around him." After Martha had left, Elellanena examined her bouquet, which Martha had thoughtfully arranged in a vase on her nightstand. The flowers were already beginning to droop slightly, their fragrant message fading with their freshness. But the charm, that was permanent. It was a tangible token she could keep, a reminder of their secret meeting. She carefully attached it to the silken tassel of her fan, where it would be visible only to those who knew to look for it. At the Thornton ball, she would carry this fan, and James would see that she had accepted his gift, that she had accepted his message. As she drifted off to sleep, Elellanena reflected on the tumultuous events of the day. In the space of just a few hours, her courtship with James Thornfield had accelerated dramatically, moving from the realm of proper public interactions into the thrilling, dangerous territory of secret notes, meaningful gifts, and clandestine meetings. The rigid rules of Victorian society still constrained them at every turn, but they had found ways to communicate beneath the surface, to connect on a deeper level, using the very tools designed to maintain propriety to express their burgeoning feelings. You, tucked safely in your modern bed, might find it all absurdly, needlessly complicated. Why not just say what you feel? Why the elaborate, exhausting codes and signals? But perhaps there is something to be said for a society that valued restraint, that understood the profound power of subtlety. When every glance, every gesture, every carefully chosen word carried immense weight, nothing was casual, nothing was thoughtless. In our modern world of instant messages and swipe-right dating, maybe we have lost something of that delicious, agonizing anticipation, that careful, profound consideration before expression. The Victorians may have taken it to ridiculous extremes, but the underlying principle remains. What is difficult to obtain is often more highly valued. Sleep well. Dream of a time when a simple fan could speak volumes, when flowers carried secret messages, and when the chance to say someone's Christian name for the first time felt as intimate, as thrilling, and as revolutionary as a first kiss does today. The Thornton Ball awaits in our next chapter. It is the highlight of Elellanena season, a glittering arena where dances are promised, reputations are made and broken, and the coded language of the ballroom brings its own set of thrills and perils. Victorian courtship is about to move from the drawing room to the dance floor where new rules, new dangers, new opportunity. The week leading up to the Thornton Ball was a frantic, dizzying flurry of preparation for Elellanena. This was not just any social event. This was the event of the early season, the glittering apex where reputations were cemented, engagements were unofficially brokered, and courtships either blossomed into public acknowledgement or withered and died under the intense, collective gaze of London society. Your dance card must be managed with the precision of a military campaign, her mother instructed over breakfast 3 days before the ball. Her voice was that of a seasoned general briefing her troops before a major battle. You must accept no more than 2 dances from any single gentleman, and that includes Mr. Thornfield. Elellanena looked up from her toast, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face. Even though he escorted us to the Phillipses' soiree? Asterisk, especially asterisk because of that, her mother replied firmly. Society is already taking note of his particular attentions toward you. To dance with him more than twice in one evening would be tantamount to a public declaration. It would suggest that an understanding already exists between you. That was the Victorian code for, everyone in this room will assume you are practically engaged, which would be a source of immense scandal and gossip without a formal, family-approved announcement. Unlike today, where you might post a relationship status update on social media or casually introduce someone as your boyfriend after a few dates, Victorians progressed through the stages of a relationship at a glacial pace, moving through a series of carefully defined, publicly acknowledged steps. "And what of Mr. Darlington?" Elellanena asked, unable to keep the note of profound reluctance from her voice. "He has called 3 times now. His family connections are impeccable," her mother said, her tone pointed and final. "You would do well to encourage him with at least 1 dance." Elellanena sighed. The cold, hard, transactional nature of the Victorian marriage market was inescapable. Mr. Darlington might make her skin crawl with his intense, predatory gaze, but his high social standing made him a good prospect in her mother's strategic calculations. The morning of the ball dawned with an unexpected, almost miraculous burst of sunshine streaming through London's perpetual gray haze. Elellanena awoke early, her stomach a churning knot of nerves and excitement, making sleep impossible. Tonight would be different from the formal dinner parties or the staid musical evenings. Tonight she would dance with James. Their bodies would move together in choreographed, socially sanctioned patterns that, while rigidly proper, allowed for a physical closeness that was incredibly rare, almost scandalous, in any other context of Victorian society. "You're awake already, miss?" Martha asked, entering the room with the morning water. Her face was creased with a knowing smile. "Excited for tonight, are we?" "Anxious might be a more accurate word, Martha," Elellanena admitted, sitting up in her cold bed. Martha grinned. "Well, we've got your best gown pressed and ready. You'll outshine every single girl there tonight, if you don't mind my saying so." The preparations for a grand ball made the preparations for a dinner party look like a casual, impromptu affair. Elellanena spent the entire day in a state of ritualized beautification, not because she was particularly vain, but because the merciless standards of Victorian beauty demanded it. First came the bath, a true luxury. This time, the lukewarm water was scented not just with rosewater, but with expensive French-milled soap that filled the room with the fragrance of lavender. Then came a rigorous hair washing, a major undertaking that was, at most, a weekly event in Victorian times. This was followed by the hours-long process of drying her thick, long hair by the fireplace. There were no hair dryers, of course. There was only patience and the strategic placement of one's head near a source of heat. Lunch was a light, almost non-existent meal. A few bites of cold chicken and a piece of fruit, because tonight's corset would be laced even tighter than usual. A full stomach would make the ordeal unbearable. By mid-afternoon, the serious, architectural preparations began. "Arms up, miss," Martha instructed, her voice all business as she lowered the formidable corset around Elellanina's chemise-covered torso. This was a special ball corset, even more heavily boned and designed for maximum waist cinching. The first hard pull of the laces made Elellanena gasp, her breath catching in her throat. "Must it be so tight, Martha? Ball gowns are cut smaller and tighter than day dresses, miss," Martha explained, grunting with the effort of the next pull. "Especially in the waist. It's the fashion." By the sixth pull, Elellanina's vision was starting to swim. She could only take tiny, shallow sips of air from the very top of her lungs. Her waist was compressed to a degree that modern medical eyes would consider not just unhealthy, but actively dangerous. But in 1862, a tiny, doll-like waist was the absolute foundation of feminine beauty, an aesthetic ideal that was considered well worth the price of a few crushed ribs and the occasional fainting spell. "Now for the petticoats," Martha said, seemingly oblivious to Elellanina's visible discomfort. Layer after layer of starched cotton and muslin went over the corset and the wide crinoline cage, each layer adding more weight, each one more elaborate than the last. The outermost petticoat was a confection of lace and silk ribbons, a beautiful, extravagant garment that, paradoxically, no one would ever see. That was Victorian fashion in a nutshell. Beauty and propriety extended even to the most hidden, unseen layers. Finally, it was time for the ball gown itself. After much debate with her mother, Elellanena had chosen a gown of pale blue silk, the color of a twilight sky, adorned with delicate silver embroidery that shimmered in the light. The bodice was cut lower than her day dresses, exposing the tops of her shoulders and her collarbones, though it was still profoundly modest by modern standards. The short, puffed sleeves left her arms bare from just below the shoulder, one of the very few instances where a respectable Victorian woman could show some skin in public. "You look beautiful, miss," Martha said, her voice filled with genuine admiration as she stepped back to admire her handiwork. Like something from a fairy story, Elellanena turned to face the full-length mirror. The girl who stared back at her seemed ethereal, almost otherworldly. Her skin was fashionably pale against the blue of the dress. Her waist was impossibly tiny. Her voluminous skirts seemed to float around her like a cloud. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate confection of curls, with small, fresh silk flowers woven throughout. "The final touch," Martha said, presenting Elellanena with her fan. The fan, the one now bearing James's tiny, secret silver book charm. Elellanena took it, her gloved fingers running over the charm for a brief, reassuring moment. "Now you remember what your mother taught you," Martha said with a mischievous wink. "The language of the fan is a powerful weapon in a ballroom." When Elellanena descended the grand staircase, her parents were waiting for her in the entry hall. Her father looked up from his pocket watch and stared, for a moment genuinely speechless. "My dear," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "you are a vision." Her mother, ever the pragmatist, circled her. Her eyes narrowed in a final, critical appraisal. "The neckline sits well. The waist could be a fraction tighter, but it will have to do. Remember your posture throughout the evening, Elellanena. No slouching, especially during the longest dances." As if slouching were even a physical possibility in a corset this tight, Elellanena thought, but she held her tongue. Their carriage joined the long, glittering line of vehicles approaching Thornton House. The grand mansion was ablaze with light. Gas lamps illuminated the imposing entrance, where footmen in elaborate powdered wigs and livery assisted a river of silk and jewel-clad ladies from their carriages. The sound of a full orchestra drifted from the open windows, along with the gentle murmur of hundreds of conversations and the occasional burst of polite laughter. "Now remember," her mother whispered urgently as they approached the receiving line at the ballroom entrance. "Your dance card is a strategic document. It should include a mix of established, important gentlemen and a few new acquaintances. Too many dances with your familiar partners suggests that your appeal is limited. Too many with new strangers suggests an improper eagerness." Elellanena nodded automatically, her head swimming with the endless, contradictory, and utterly exhausting rules. Imagine if modern dating apps came with a 300-page instruction manual, detailing exactly how to swipe, when to message, and what kind of photos to post, all with the ever-present threat of complete social annihilation if you got it wrong. The Thornton ballroom literally took Elellanina's breath away, what little breath her corset allowed her. It was a vast, magnificent space. Massive crystal chandeliers, each holding hundreds of real wax candles, cast a warm, prismatic light across the polished parquet floors. Enormous arrangements of hothouse flowers filled every corner, their heavy, sweet scent mixing why. Along one wall, rows of gilt chairs were arranged for the chaperones and the older dowagers, a veritable tribunal of matriarchs who would watch the evening's proceedings with sharp, critical eyes. The opposite wall featured a series of long French windows, thrown open to a wide stone terrace, offering a blessed promise of cool air and relief from the suffocating heat of the ballroom. On a raised platform at the far end of the room, a full orchestra of at least 20 musicians in formal attire was already playing a lively tune. Almost immediately, as soon as they had passed through the receiving line, Elellanena was approached by a young man she vaguely recognized from the Chamberlain's dinner party. "Miss Hartwell," he said, executing a slightly awkward bow. "Might I be so bold as to request your name on your dance card for the first quadrille?" And so it began, the delicate, high-stakes negotiation of the dance card. This was a small, decorative booklet, often made of ivory or mother-of-pearl, attached to her wrist by a silk cord. Inside, the various dances of the evening, quadrilles, waltzes, polkas, were pre-printed on its pages, with a small, blank space beside each for a gentleman to write his name. Filling this card was a delicate and crucial balance of strategy, social obligation, and, if one was very lucky, genuine personal preference. Elellanena accepted the young man's request, and then continued to navigate through the glittering, swirling crowd with her mother, exchanging greetings and accepting more dance requests. Mr. Darlington found her almost immediately, his approach swift and direct. He secured the first waltz of the evening with a smile that didn't quite reach his intense, watchful eyes. "You look enchanting tonight, Miss Hartwell," he said, standing a fraction of an inch too close for comfort. That shade of blue is celestial." "Thank you, Mr. Darlington," Elellanena replied, taking a small, subtle step backward to reestablish a proper. "I shall count the minutes until our dance," he said, his gaze lingering on her in a way that made her feel deeply uncomfortable. Before she could formulate a polite but distancing reply, another voice interrupted, cool and calm. "Mr. Darlington." It was James. "Miss Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell." He greeted them with a graceful, formal bow. "You both look radiant this evening." Elellanina's pulse quickened at the sight of him. He was devastatingly handsome in his formal evening attire. A perfectly tailored black tailcoat, a crisp white waistcoat, and pristine white gloves. His cravat was tied in the latest, most fashionable style, and his dark hair was neatly combed, though one rebellious lock had already curled over his forehead. "Mr. Thornfield," her mother acknowledged, her voice filled with warmth. "How fortunate to encounter you so early in the evening. Elellanina's dance card is filling up rather rapidly." This was her mother's none-too-subtle way of telling him to stake his claim before all the desirable dances were spoken for. "In that case," he said with a slight, knowing smile directed at Elellanena, "might I be so bold as to request the honor of the supper dance, Miss Hartwell? And perhaps the final waltz of the evening as well." This was a significant public declaration. The supper dance, the set immediately preceding the midnight meal, was particularly meaningful. The gentleman who partnered a lady for this dance would also escort her to supper afterward, allowing for a rare, extended period of actual conversation. And the final waltz of the evening was equally symbolic, a clear statement of serious and possibly exclusive interest. "I would be delighted, Mr. Thornfield," Elellanena replied, offering him her dance card and the tiny pencil attached to it. As he wrote his name in the appropriate spaces, she noticed his gaze flick down to her fan, to the tiny silver book charm attached to its tassel. The corner of his mouth twitched upward slightly. It was a private, silent acknowledgement of their shared secret, a moment of connection invisible to everyone else in the crowded, noisy room. By the time the orchestra struck up the opening chords of the first quadrille, Elellanina's dance card was completely full. This was both a profound relief and a significant social triumph. An empty or partially filled dance card was a public humiliation, a clear sign that a young woman was not considered desirable, a fate no one wanted to endure. Her first partner was perfectly polite but utterly forgettable, one of the dozens of interchangeable young men making the rounds of the London season in search of a suitable wife with a respectable dowry. The complex, formal steps of the quadrille, a dance performed in a square formation of 4 couples, prevented much conversation, which was probably for the best, as he seemed to have nothing interesting to say beyond predictable comments about the weather. The second dance of the evening brought Mr. Darlington, and the first waltz. From the moment he took her gloved hand in his and placed his other hand on her waist, Elellanena felt a profound sense of unease. He held her slightly too close, his fingers pressing a fraction too firmly against her corseted waist. The waltz, with its swirling, continuous turns, required a level of physical proximity that felt intimate and, with him, vaguely threatening. "You dance divinely, Miss Hartwell," he murmured, his face uncomfortably near hers during a promenade. "Thank you," she replied, subtly using her own posture to increase the distance between them. "The orchestra is quite exceptional tonight, is it not? I have called at your home 3 times now," he continued, completely ignoring her attempt to redirect the conversation to a safer topic. "I was beginning to believe you were actively avoiding me." Elellanina's chest tightened, and not just from the crushing pressure of the corset. His tone held a sharp, unsettling edge of accusation that was most improper. "My mother and I maintain a very busy social calendar during the season," she said carefully, her voice cool. "We are rarely at home these days. And yet, you seem to find time for Mr. Thornfield," he observed, his smile not reaching his eyes. She was saved from having to formulate a response by the choreography of the dance, which temporarily separated them. When they came together again for the final turns, she deliberately kept the conversation to the most benign, impersonal topics imaginable. The floral decorations, the impressive guest list, the weather yet again. When the dance finally ended, he held her hand for a moment longer than propriety dictated. "Until our next dance, Miss Hartwell." She curtsied briefly and retreated to her mother's side near the wall, subtly flexing her fingers to dispel the unpleasant, lingering sensation of his grip. "Mr. Darlington seems quite taken with you," her mother observed, her eyes gleaming with strategic approval. "He seems intense," Elellanena replied cautiously. "Intensity can be a sign of great passion," her mother said, fanning herself slowly. "That is not an And so, our journey with Elellanena Hartwell comes to a close. She successfully navigated the perilous, intricate, and often absurd world of Victorian courtship. She endured the corsets, survived the 12-course dinners, mastered the secret languages of fans and flowers, and emerged not with a mere strategic alliance, but with the promise of a genuine, loving partnership. Her story, and the stories of millions of others like her, reminds us that the human search for connection, for love, for a partner in life, is a universal and timeless quest. The rules may change, the technologies may evolve, the fashions may seem bizarre to our modern eyes, but the fundamental desire to find that one person who sees you, who understands you, and who values you for who you truly are, remains the same. So, the next time you find yourself frustrated by the complexities of modern dating, the next time you're tired of swiping and ghosting and awkward conversations, take a moment to be grateful. Be grateful for the freedom to speak your mind, to choose your own partner, to get to know someone privately and personally, and most of all, be grateful for the simple, profound, and wonderful ability to breathe freely both literally and metaphorically. The path to love has never been easy, but at least, for us, it no longer requires a steel-boned corset and a 12-course etiquette exam.